Welcome back to the Lions 24/7 podcast. We got a lot to talk about on this post-game show. It has been 40 years since a top 10 team lost to a team that was winless at 0-4 or worse. Penn State broke that 40-year streak today, a 42-37 loss to the previously winless UCLA Bruins. A ton to work our way through. I'm here. Night has fallen in Happy Valley, where the team's on its way back to quite an environment for the upcoming week leading up to homecoming. Daniel Gowan, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see sun is shining still over the Rose Bowl, and he's got the sunglasses on. He has found a spot for us after doing some post-game coverage, talking to some players, asking a question of James Franklin. So you may hear a little background noise there in the Rose Bowl. We'll deal with that. We've got a lot to get to, and we appreciate Daniel for finding some spot in that stadium to speak with us. Daniel, we're going to get a lot of color from you, I think, because you just worked your way through that stadium. You not only heard from Penn State players and James Franklin, but you heard a lot of noise from UCLA players along the way as well. Paint a picture for what this looked like in the immediate aftermath before we talk about how we got here.
Yeah, so it was actually a pretty surreal scene from the press box starting out. UCLA had confetti cannons, and so you've got this blue and gold confetti raining down onto the field. The students were gathered in one of the end zones, and they were trying to rush the field. There was a line of security keeping them back. They put the goalpost down immediately. And then as UCLA is on the field celebrating, various fans broke that first wall of security and then start sprinting out towards the middle of the field. There's other security guards trying to chase them down. Saw a couple hits get delivered in the open field on some people rushing the field. Like, it was a scene of some people that did not expect to end up in that situation. I think everyone on that field was in a similar boat, whether they were UCLA players, UCLA fans, and then the Penn State players as they went off the field. Mark Brennan was down there. I'm sure Brennan Cam will be a must watch for that. But it was a very, I think, disbelief, jubilation. Me and Rich Scarcella from the Reading Eagle were walking through the tunnel to get to the stands to go down, and there was a girl in the tunnel screaming that she couldn't believe they won the effing game. We're down in the media room. Some UCLA players are going by, yelling about how they got the most rushing yards on Penn State. Maybe some colorful language mixed in there when it comes to Penn State. Just like a really surreal scene. I think maybe it kind of reminded me of the Iowa game a couple years ago, just in terms of, quite a finish, a little bit of disbelief on one side, and then, a lot of celebration, from the fans and the stands right there. I think that we're all still trying to work our way through it. I think UCLA fans are working their way through it. We know the Penn State fans are working their way through it, especially on Lions247.com. Just a really unexpected scene, I think is the best way to describe it.
Yeah, and surreal can have a double meaning. It can mean a nightmare, it can mean a dream, and you're seeing both of those play out for a couple different programs who we thought came into this matchup at very different points. I mean, UCLA had not led anyone through their first four games. They never held a lead. They were up 27-7 at halftime. Penn State was chasing them the entire matchup. Way different than anyone anticipated. You could hear in the broadcast during CBS with a couple of guys and that Brad Nessler and Gary Danielson, who've seen it all across college football. They were stunned by this moment. And I'll go back to the stat I referenced earlier. The last time you saw a top 10 team be defeated by an opponent who was winless at 0-4 or worse was 1985 when UTEP beat number 7 BYU. On top of that, Daniel, this is Penn State's first time with a losing streak in 46 games. And you talked to James Franklin about this afterwards. He talked about it last Monday and saying you can't let one loss turn to two. Clearly, psychologically, this Penn State football team was not ready for recovery from that painful Oregon loss. And boy, did it bite them in the ass in a significant way.
Yeah, I was going through some audio with Dom DeLuca, the senior three-time team captain. And one thing that he kept coming back to was preparation. And that, he feels like that they didn't prepare well throughout the week. I think that James Franklin kind of said overall that Penn State didn't do the best job of handling everything that came with this week. I know everyone's really happy on multiple social media platforms that he mentioned travel as in that mix there. But it's just so uncharacteristic of what we've come to expect from a James Franklin coach team, where they just really just laid an egg. And, I think that you can talk about laying an egg in a big spot. Like that first half against Oregon, I don't think we were necessarily surprised by that. What we've seen against Michigan and Ohio State the past couple of years, it's not a surprise because that's a quality opponent. And I think that some of it goes beyond like what Penn State is doing, how Penn State is approaching it. With this, UCLA, this team should be going 0-12. That is the general consensus around college football. I was talking to one of my buddies last night. He said that he's been hearing that 0-12 was in play. I think that it's just been a topic of conversation that this is going to be one of the worst Power 4 teams. You talk about they lost at Northwestern last week, and the consensus is that Northwestern's like a bad P4 team, a bad Big Ten team, but UCLA is a whole different level. Like they're a disaster of a team, and they just did not look like it tonight. Whatever they hit on during the week, I think that James Franklin did mention that he didn't really know what to expect from a team like this coming in, but whatever UCLA hit on, and I think that they played the game like they had nothing to lose in terms of being aggressive, doing that onside kick, taking risks, trying to dictate the terms of the game on their terms. I think that is something that I think caught Penn State off guard early. Like if you put the pieces together, it seems like that they weren't necessarily prepared for a team to come out like that. Maybe they were prepared for what we thought in picking the scores that we did, that this was going to be a team that was going to come out, lay down, and just really let Penn State roll. Like it's a beautiful day. Like let's get this over quick. Like let's move on to what's next. Like I really think that that's the maybe Penn State was looking at this similar to we were, but just a total baffler. Like it's been so hard to find the right words to describe what we saw because there are so many you can choose from. I told you at halftime I went to thesaurus.com, looked up all the synonyms for disaster because I figured that we were trending that way. And I was talking to Mark Brennan, and I was like, even if they won that game, even if they on that fourth down, even if they convert, even if they go score, then they either send it to overtime or they somehow win 43-42. Like nothing to take away from this game for me in terms of a positive. Like this type of opponent, this type of game, it was just really, really bad.
Well, the positive is you'd only have one loss versus two. And I get, that's a significant difference. But to your point, you're absolutely right about so much of that. And I think just want to go back in terms of the psychological impact, because we laid this out on the table coming into the podcast. James Franklin addressed it quite a bit last week. And we told you the body language and kind of just what we were picking up of James Franklin after Wednesday's practice was a bit uncharacteristic, and it wasn't really all that great. And I don't know how much that carries into the entire team. I had Zariah Fisher tell me that during the week last week, they've got family members essentially, reaching out to them about that Oregon loss, and they're hearing it from all angles. But boy, you'd think that you'd be able to strap it up against this UCLA team. There was an 11-11 span, Daniel, between 2020 and 2021. I know the 21 season was your first on campus. They went 4-5 in 2020. They rallied from that 0-5 start during COVID. Then they went 7-6 in 2021. Along the way, they were playing pretty well before the wheels fell off, and James Franklin got that long contract extension. But after those couple seasons where you really wondered, where is this team? There's kind of a fork in the road moment in terms of what they were going to be. There's a 3-year span behind us now, Daniel, where the Nittany Lions remained emotionally sturdy through those painful losses, and they had their painful losses, and they avoided the psychologically slipping into a bad place that resonates over the course of a week and dooms you in the next matchup. I'm not sure whether that era ended this afternoon in Pasadena, or if we just didn't realize that it ended down in South Florida following Drew Aller's interception against Notre Dame and losing that matchup. But what I can say is that era is over, and this team has a ton to prove. They got a lot of pride that they're going to have to apply right now, because this is just about bottom of the barrel when you talk about the expectations versus reality. Year number 11 for James Franklin. We'll talk about some of the commentary he had and some of the questions coming out of this game. But this is relatively uncharted territory for any one of these players who have joined the program, because we're talking about most of the guys joining in 2022 or 2002, 2001. They have not been in a situation like this where they're coming home on the plane, a long ride home. And this is not a campus that's going to embrace them right now. This is not a homecoming game that's going to be fun to play in. I anticipate it will be the most toxic environment Beaver Stadium has ever experienced, perhaps. we'll be there. We'll be front and center in the press box. But that's what they now come home to. James Franklin said last week on Wednesday, it was a good time to get out of town. Man, this is a tough time to come home.
You talk about like all the noise that's surrounding this team and the volume. We thought it was pretty high after that Oregon game, and it's just going to be cranked up like a whole other level. Based on our message board, based on what the mentions look like on social media, I think that.
But just turn on SportsCenter tonight. I mean, there are some college football Saturdays where wins are the biggest stories, but there are other stories. There are other Saturdays in college football where failures are the biggest story. And right now, that's James Franklin. That's Penn State. Everyone's poking fun at them. Everyone's laughing at them. No one believes in them. And it's been a long time where I think Penn State was this much of a punchline in football terms.
Yeah, I think you'll have like the slightest bit of cover from Texas losing today to Florida, because Arch Manning is, I think, as an entity, is bigger than Penn State football right now. That's just the industrial complex we're in. But yeah, I mean, I think that coupled with last week, it's just like it's going to be bad. Like, I don't really have another way to describe it. Like, I think the way you kind of forecasted it, like the most toxic Beaver Stadium that we've seen, like, I think that's going to be the truth. I mean, I was making a joke to Mark Brennan when we were walking up. I was like, I wonder if they're going to close the windows in the press box during pregame introductions so that, maybe to mute the boos for us a little bit. I mean, it's going to be a tough scene. And I think that every week you learn more about, the team that you're watching, the team that you're covering. I think that we learned a lot this past week that was not good. And we're going to have the opportunity to learn a lot more. I mean, I think that this next 2-game stretch is really definitive for them. I think that after last week's loss, I mean, I laid it out to you. I was like, okay, they got 2 get-right games. Then you go to Iowa, and that's like a tough challenge. That's like a little, like, nice little taste before you go into Ohio State. And it was basically, I viewed it as a 1-game season. And now I don't really know how to view it anymore. I think that, Dom DeLuca and Drew Aller, they said that, their goals are still ahead of them. Denai Dennis Sutton was a little more like, hey, we got to win next week. He was like, yeah, I don't even know when we play next, but when we do, like, we got to win. We got to go out and do it. But I think that what you saw, like, talking about their goals still being ahead of them, like, theoretically that's true. I mean, but from what we saw, like, in practice, it just doesn't really feel like a possibility today. Like, I think that looking at this team, like, this is not a national championship contender. Like, a national championship contender doesn't get completely pantsed in the first half against a team that does not have a coordinator on its staff. That, Jerry Neuheisel is calling an offense for the first time, I think. Like, they just were unprepared, it felt like, for what they saw. And that's not what championship teams do. That's not even, teams that are contending for national championships don't do that. Even the number 12 seed that gets into the playoff, the number 11 seed, like, they don't do those types of things. You do have a mulligan the way the playoff is scheduled. And I do think that if you finish 10-2 and you beat Ohio State, even with this loss on your resume, I think you're in the playoff. And we saw how things broke last year in terms of the Big Ten race, in terms of unexpected results, opening some doors that we didn't think would be open. It's really hard for me to see that. I'd probably put that at like a 1%, 2% possibility, but it's just like, it's very hard to see a road for this team moving forward that features, a game on December 19th or December 20th, much less one New Year's Eve, New Year's Day.
Their resume is absolutely terrible. I mean, they had 3 non-conference wins against no one. They struggled to beat one of those no ones. I mean, at least to run away from FIU. I shouldn't say they struggled to beat them because the final score was what it was, but it was 10-0 at halftime. We had concerns coming out of non-conference play that we didn't think we'd have. You've dropped your first Big Ten game against Oregon. People say, okay, that sucks, but it's a top 2 team right now in Oregon. Then you have what I would say, you're going to get to the end of the season. This will probably still look like the worst loss that anyone suffered in college football. Like, this is the loss of the season that's going to stand out. And so, yeah, we'll talk about running the table later, but right now there's no layups. And that goes to my point before. This team was fantastic 2022, 2023, 2024 in converting those layups. Were there some dicey moments at USC, at Minnesota? Sure. But they got the job done, and they didn't get buried in those games where they didn't look ready to play. And I think that's where we need to start. I've been kind of waiting to see where we're going to poke our head into the game flow here. And how about the fact that UCLA is up 10-0 on Penn State? Again, a UCLA team that did not lead through the first 4 games of the season. They're up 10-0 before Drew Aller takes a snap, because they go down the field, march down for a 75-yard touchdown drive to start things off, convert an onside kick where there was no one within like the camera shot for Penn State to recover it. They get a field goal out of that situation, and it just felt like all of a sudden, oh, UCLA is not going to roll over and play dead. They're here to play. Is Penn State going to respond? And we didn't really get an answer until the third quarter, when they showed up a little bit more prepared and started doing some things. But from coaching staff, time clock management, play calling, player utilization, defensively, offensively, it was a mess in the first half. And we thought, hey, if they come out and sleepwalk through, maybe they'll only be winning 10-7, or maybe it's a 6-6 game at halftime and everyone's concerned. No, they were down by 20 at halftime.
Yeah, I know that last week after the Oregon game, I was beating that drum where it's like, why does it take being down 17-3 before your offense shows any pulse? And it was even worse today. Like, you're down 27-7 before you show a pulse, before you show any signs of life. And I asked Kyron Hudson after the game, I was like, why? Like, why is this happening? Why is it taking this? And, you know, he went back to what we heard all week. We got to start fast. We got to be prepared. You know, we got to come in. We got to come out, quick. And I said, well, like, why aren't you guys doing that? And he said, that's a question for coach. So it's just like the same old pattern again and again. And this was, the really damning part of this is that, like, it wasn't in one of those big spots. Like, it wasn't in the Big Ten championship game where it's like, okay, we're going to like fight this out. You know, there's a title on the line or whatever. Like, it's against a bad team. I think the environment, like, it was sleepy. Like, announced attendance was 39,000. Rose Bowl capacity is 90,000. They've got the UCLA tarps on either side. Penn State traveled pretty well. I would say that this was not a hard environment to play in by any means. And you knew that coming in, and just to come out flat like you did and get in that hole is just really, really rough. I know there are some extenuating circumstances with the offense in terms of you only had 3 possessions in the first half. Like you talked about, UCLA, they have a 10-0 lead. You haven't run a play. The first quarter is more than halfway done. There's 7:20 left when you get the ball back. But then you look at what Penn State did with those possessions, and let's see, like, got to get drive. It's 10 plays, 75-yard drive, and you're like, okay, like, this is a team that has its footing. Like, they are going to be ready. Like, maybe they are up to this. But then you go 3 and out, and then you get the ball back with the opportunity to double dip going into halftime. You're down, I think it was 24-7 at that point, and you're like, okay, 24-10. You can come out, make it 24-17 or 24-14, come out, make it 24-21, and just some really baffling time management there. Franklin said on the CBS broadcast at halftime that they were playing to score in the final seconds. I just watched that. You heard me talk about the Green Bay Packers on Sunday night against the Dallas Cowboys, how they handled the end of that overtime where it felt like they were playing for a long field goal. And that's the impression that you got from Penn State in that sequence, where it did not feel like that they were playing to win the game there. It didn't feel like they were playing to score a touchdown. Like 7 points, you want that more than 3 points. If you give them a little bit of time left, your defense just needs to step up. Almost use a little colorful language right there on this.
Hey, this is the podcast. If you want to let it fly, this is the episode to do it.
But and just the way that they played that, and it ends in disaster. Drew Aller getting sacked, which then leads to a UCLA long field goal. Like, just everything that went wrong, that could have gone wrong, went wrong. And I do feel like that some of it could have been prevented. Like, it should have been 24-10 at worst going into half instead of 27-7. Like, just all of these little things came together, like that play calling. You're doing handoffs to Nick Singleton. I think they ran like 3 plays and 90 seconds came off the clock in that sequence. Like, it was just bad, mismanaged. You can take it where you want to go from here. But I think that just put a bow on that first half.
Gary Danielson, the CBS analyst, called it, quote, the most shocking halftime score we've seen in college football this season. It ended up being the most shocking final score, too. But during that possession for Penn State, where you're like, okay, what are they trying to do here with the clock, with where they are on the field? You had Brad Nessler say, quote, that's the weirdest sequence I've seen in the last 10 years. And I had to say out loud, like, which of these teams fired their coach a couple weeks ago and is working with guys who have never been coordinators for this team? I mean, you've got a defensive coordinator who, if I recall correctly, was on like Syracuse's staff a few weeks ago. You've got an offensive coordinator or play caller. I guess he didn't have the official title of OC. No one has the official title of that, but Neuheisel certainly did it. The young Jerry Neuheisel. You had the highest paid defensive coordinator in college football history going up against a play caller, 33 years old, who's never operated as an OC in a matchup before. And he ate his lunch all day long. And I think, look, we got to get to Jim Knowles here, Daniel, because that was what the tone was set early, that UCLA was going to be able to go up and down the field in this defense. And all due respect to losing Tony Rojas, who we certainly know is a strong player and one of the better athletes on this defense, it's inexcusable the way it played out offensively. I don't know where you want to start, but Jim Knowles got to kind of avoid some of the scrutiny last week. You know, when you hold Oregon to 3 points through about 40 minutes of that game, you can't really hang the loss on the defense. We talked about them running out of gas late, but I think you factor in those two short drives for overtime in Oregon, and then the first two here, that's like 5 consecutive drives against this defense that result in points. And you had a UCLA team with 17 points on you through 3 possessions it was, and they were averaging 14 points through the first 4 games. I mean, Jim Knowles, I'm sure in Columbus right now, they're toasting him and they're raising their glasses to him because there's a little animosity still there in play, despite him being the DC for a national title team. But boy, oh boy, does he have to go back to the drawing board after this one.
Yeah, I mean, I've been covering college football, NFL, whatever, for like 8 of the past 10 years, most of the past decade. This is the first time I've ever been somewhere where fans are chanting the offensive coordinator's name. Like there were these Jerry chants, in the first half. They carried him off the field after the game ended. It was a little bit of a rhyme to when he was a player and got carried off the field. I think that was a bowl win against Texas, if I'm remembering correctly, or just a win over Texas.
Daniel, something you didn't see was they kept having his dad, who's a studio analyst with CBS, so one of our friends in the network, but they kept having his dad pop in like almost the entire first quarter. It was like Pops, basically cheering on his son during the broadcast. So it was even more painful for Penn State fans watching from home, watching him have that success against Knowles and watching his dad get to cheer on him like it was like a JV football game with dad in the bleachers.
I mean, I think that we all thought it was going to be a JV football game. So, I think that if you're CBS, it's probably like, this might be a little feel good thing. Like when it's a, 10-7, 7-7 game in the first quarter, we can, get this out of the way. And then, Penn State will take it. You'll roll from there. But yeah, I mean, just the way that UCLA was able to keep Penn State off balance. And a lot of that was Nico. I mean, the way that he played, it was fantastic. I mean, there was a lot of talk early in the year where it's like, is he just bad? Like, is this just a miss? Is this whole like those 21, 22, 23 like recruiting quarterback classes? Was it just COVID and everything just made it impossible to really get good evaluations? Like, is he just going to be a miss? And he was not that today. I mean, he was excellent. The third down scrambles, the ability to make guys miss, that athleticism that we hear so much about was, I think, really on display. He had a 52-yard scramble on a third down that I think was really, really deflating for Penn State. I think it was a 1-score game at that point. Then it went to become a 2-score game. He was really good. And he threw some really nice balls. I mean, he had the deep ball to Quasi Gilmore. I think it was a 43-yarder. And, Gilmore had to step on Elliott Washington, and King Mack was closing fast. He was on his horse. We know how fast he is. And those are 2 of the fastest guys on this team. And Nico's pass just, gets in the perfect spot, sets them up for a score. I came away really, really impressed with Nico. It was just, a lot of good things out there. It seemed like he was playing really free, really easy. And I do think that maybe that's where you see some of that coaching change come into play. Maybe a different voice, maybe a different energy around the practice field that you're able to carry over. But Yeah, I mean, the defense was not that impressive. I think Dom DeLuca had a pretty rough game. He was in there for Tony Rojas. He played the entire game except for one snap. He got banged up a little bit, left for one play. Cam Smith, the freshman, came in, made his debut. That was the only snap he played. We thought there was a possibility we could see a little bit more of him, given the depth issues there, but we did not. And it really seemed like that UCLA was seeking out Dom DeLuca as someone to go after, someone to run at. I know that we love grit and heart and everything that goes into it. And I think DeLuca is a really, really great college football story. But good stories don't win you titles. On Saturdays, good stories there's a reason guys who are 5-stars have more success. Like there's a reason that the better athletes run out. And I think that UCLA did a really nice job game planning for that with no Tony Rojas in the second level.
Yeah, James Franklin actually said that Tony Rojas, if he's available, is going to be spying Nico in that game. And yeah, they tried a few other spy opportunities, according to Franklin. It did not work out well. There's other opportunities, other moments where they went in man coverage and it broke down. And he had back-breaking run after back-breaking run on 3rd and longs. And coming into this game, his career high for rushing was 65 yards. He was at 128 today. At one point, he was at 130, so he lost some yards later. He doubled his career rushing total in this game. 52-yarder was a huge one. I think that was a 3rd and 7 situation. He had two runs over 20 yards, I think, on a couple other 3rd and longs. And then passing, like you said, he was excellent. 17 of 24, 166 doesn't tell the story. He didn't put the ball in bad areas. He didn't kind of leave himself open to takeaways against this Penn State defense, and he put the ball on the money. It's in tight windows. 2 touchdowns through the air, 3 touchdowns on the ground, 5 total scores, no turnovers for Nico. And ultimately, James Franklin said he was the separating factor. He at the end of the day, he was the guy who made the plays when they needed to be made, and Penn State did not have an answer for him. And it's just crazy because he was so bogged down. I mean, we had a UCLA reporter, one of the few reporters I spoke to who cover the Bruins this week, who were like, yes, 0-12 is definitely a possibility. They've been saying, hey, he hasn't looked bad, but there just hasn't been much of a spark around him on offense. So I don't know if the previous offensive coordinator and the previous plan was didn't recognize that he had the talent, and now they're just kind of letting him roam a little bit more. But ultimately, Penn State did not have a solution, and he looked every bit the 5-star quarterback. He was as dynamic of a quarterback performance I've seen against Penn State since maybe going back to Justin Fields for Ohio State. I may be missing some where someone's doing things outside the pocket, up the field, with their arm. I can't think of a lot. Dylan Gabriel had a really nice game against them in the Big Ten championship game last year, but he didn't do it with his legs. I mean, Riley Leonard made up some really clutch plays last year in the Orange Bowl, but it wasn't the complete performance that we saw today. And again, that's coming from the guy who spent much of the offseason kind of being laughed at by the college football world. And now that they were a month into the season, it was like, dude, you walked away from an opportunity to be the quarterback for a college football playoff contender. And yet here he is walking off the field on CBS in a national game where if you weren't paying attention early, someone probably called you and said, yo, turn on that game. Penn State's in trouble. And now Nico kind of has the last laugh momentarily. They could maybe go 1-11 this year. He would still have this moment, signature kind of performance, signature victory. And it came against a Penn State defense that we just did not think was ripe for the picking against anybody this year. I mean, we've seen them play Ohio State national championship caliber teams, Michigan national championship caliber teams, and they've held their own. They've given up 17 points, 20 points, put their offense in a position to win. Today, the offense had to chase and chase and chase. And we're going to talk about the offense now, though, Daniel, because, again, they didn't have a lot of touches early in the game, but it was ugly to finish the half, and it was ugly to finish the game. When they get into the red zone, they're at the 9-yard line, they face a 4th and 2, and then I know it's desperation time, but that 3-play sequence at the end of the game, I mean, what was that? It was like a 0-gain pass to Nick Singleton, a throw out of bounds, and then you try to do a little hook and ladder, which is what it is down to the final seconds. But, I mean, if we're going to talk about Jim Knowles, this is Andy Kotelnicki starting to stack up some stink right now, man. I mean, I know they had more yards. I think Drew showed some things today that we hadn't necessarily seen outside of the final few minutes against Oregon. I don't want to hang this on Drew. That's not where I'm motivated to go in this conversation, but scratching my head again on the play calling. You're going up against a beleaguered defense. They gave it up 230 plus yards on average on the ground rushing, one of the worst in the country. They don't have a defensive coordinator. And it's all of a sudden, you're not able to really be effective at them against them in crunch time moments where you'd think the continuity between quarterback and play caller and coaching staff would shine through in those moments. Instead, it was penalties, it was strange designs, it was strange results, and ultimately falling short of a rally.
I think we'll start with the good first, which is that throw from Drew Aller to Kyron Hudson for that 15-yard touchdown. Great throw, great catch. I know that, criticism of Aller is what it is, but, Hudson had been getting it, I think, a little bit over the past week. So that was a, good play for him. This game also meant a lot to him. He was one of the last guys off the field. So he grew up 15 minutes from here, knows the significance of the Rose Bowl, had 40 friends and family in the stands today. So, I think that he came away from this, really disappointed with the result for those personal reasons. And then Kaytron Allen, he's got something. He can do some things for you with the ball in his hands. He had 2 touchdowns. I thought that the first one, the 13-yarder, where he bounces it around the left side and goes, like, that looked like a running back with good vision, good balance, and who is feeling good and is going good.
You know what he looks like, Daniel? Kaytron Allen looks like a feature running back for a national championship contender. That's what he looks like. By the way, he had 6 touches through 3 quarters.
Yeah, and he finished with 8 carries, 50 yards. Singleton 11 carries, 39 yards. Kaytron had 1 catch. Singleton had 2 catches. So once again, you come away from it with that split that has pretty much defined their 2 careers here. I think that last series where Penn State gets the ball back with 2 minutes left, pretty sure Kaytron Allen was not on the field for any of that. Penn State, they come out for that 4th down, and we're up in the press box, and someone says, "What play do you run?" And I say, "Just give it to Kaytron, get 2 yards." And then we see the personnel group go out there, no Kaytron, and that play, I think, is what it is. I think that that play, it's one of those ones where if it works, you look pretty good. But if it fails, it's probably going to fail spectacularly. And it did. We're talking about Trevor Pena going in motion right to left in front of Drew Aller. Aller pulling the ball out of his stomach and just getting walloped immediately. I think that UCLA defense just beat Penn State on that play. I think that, that play isn't necessarily traditionally like the, man versus man, like our best versus your best, like let's go. But I think UCLA really treated it like that in their defensive approach, and they just bottled that up completely. It was bad. And so I just think that, it felt like, I was being a little pithy, but I said that, like, when you need to gain 2 yards, like only 2, like, and you have the chance to go horizontal, like you have to do it. Like you got to take advantage of your chance to go side to side when, literally all you're trying to do is, just go man versus man. Like, let's go, let's get these 2 yards. Let's try to score a touchdown. It was just really, really bad. I think that, I'm trying not to be a prisoner of the result too much, but I do think that just some of the stuff that had happened with Penn State going side to side, trying to do those things. I think there was one play where Trevor Pena at the start of a drive had like a minus 20 yard or minus 10 yard play. There's just like the gadgety stuff just isn't working right now. And I think that there needs to be some sort of simplification to just go, get north-south, use Kaytron Allen, use that offensive line that we've heard so much about, just get after it and go. And I think that should be your mindset on 4th and 2. Like, let's get after it and go. And they didn't. And we saw the result. And the rest of the country saw that result too.
Yeah, there was a previous 4th down that was on a different drive. It ended up being a touchdown, and I think it was the drive where Penn State gained all 75 yards on the ground. And Drew Aller, talk about north-south, their best plays on offense were when Drew Aller got north-south and when I think Kaytron Allen was involved. And I've talked about this before. It's not just the yards per carry with Kaytron Allen, which is 3 more than Nick Singleton on the season. It's the tone that he sets. And this is a team, not just an offense anymore. This is a team searching for tone setters, searching for someone who's going to light the fire for them. I think Drew Aller was that a bit today with some of his runs and the way he was physical going downfield. But Katron Allen is that dude. 2 touchdown runs today. He had a powerful run down the sideline where the CBS broadcast loved the physicality there, just like we do every time we see Katron Allen. And then it comes time to hey, you need to punch UCLA in the face a couple times if you want to win this game. And Katron's watching the game. Katron is on the sideline. I can't say this enough. I've said it so many times. Nick Singleton's probably going to finish as the all-time leader in touchdowns here, the all-time all-purpose yardage leader. He's going to probably top Saquon Barkley in both of those categories by the end of his senior season. We've seen a lot of great moments from him, but they are not happening right now. And Katron Allen, to me, is your most steadfast piece on offense. And when you lose your way, he needs to be your North Star. He needs to be your North Star for this offense. And they just haven't, for whatever reason, recognized that all season long, time and time again. It's one thing when we're kind of okay, maybe they're trying to work out the kinks with Nick Singleton, work on his confidence against FIU. That game is so far in the rearview mirror now. Now it's about surviving and avoiding the most embarrassing loss that any team suffered in many years. And so to not go and lean on Katron in this moment, I assume they never will. I just assume it's never going to happen, because he is a guy to keep him parked on the sideline in a moment like that, a short yardage moment especially. I just don't get it. And I'll say, outside of the interceptions that have ended some of these Penn State games more recently, Notre Dame and Oregon, and of course last Saturday, this was more to me reminiscent of the way it ended on 4th and 6 in 2018 against Ohio State with a 1-point lead. Trace McSorley is having, an all-world kind of day. You hand it off to Miles Sanders. He gets dumped in the backfield by Chase Young. You weren't having a quarterback or even a running back where it was clearly you can't take the ball out of their hands because they're so hot right now. But to not even have Katron Allen as a threat in the field, to me, it's a bit malpractice considering the body of work we have seen through now 300 minutes of football. And to not acknowledge what Katron Allen's value is, it's startling to me. It's jarring, and I think that a lot of fans are feeling that right now. Going back to that 4th down play, James Franklin was asked about it in postgame. He said it was a QB power read. They had an opportunity to get the ball on the edge, divide the defense, get the quarterback downhill based on that read. He said they brought pressure off the edge, what they anticipated from UCLA, but they beat the block that Penn State needed to lay. And because they were not able to get around him on the edge, then Drew Aller has to get the give. The give read was there, then it wasn't, and ultimately there was nowhere to go for either of those guys. Whether you hand it to Trevor Pena or you carry it forward, they're not getting that 4th down. And again, you got to execute in a play like that. And if it's a play where it's going to come down to someone's got to get a block off the edge, well, that was the case against Chase Young many moons ago too. To me, why can't you simplify it and say, let Katron find any kind of daylight, put his head forward, shove forward, even Drew Aller in a traditional kind of just draw run sense. And to me, you're going to add that kind of window dressing to it and that kind of complication to it. Again, like you said, if it pays off, it's a big play, and the conversation's different right now, but it didn't. And it didn't against a really poor UCLA team. And ultimately now Andy Kotelnicki, I think, has gone from this clearly rising star where even if you were to look past the fact that his offense didn't produce a single touchdown and he was stopped at the goal line against Ohio State last year, you can kind of say, okay, well, what does it look like this year when you have all this continuity and everyone's back essentially in all these key roles except Tyler Warren, which is a tough one. But man, I think it has been really rough to watch some of the in-game decisions that have been made, not just from the standpoint of what calls you're using, but who are the 11 players on the field. And I think that's got to be reconciled, whether it's, being us asking James Franklin over the course of the next week or them actually addressing it themselves. But it seems like they have essentially gone with the same approach game by game by game. And when everyone's kind of like, hey, this seems to be trending in a negative direction, this might end up getting ugly for you, it's gotten ugly for you.
Yeah, I think that when that play happened and that 4th and 2, the way that it did, I know the stakes are different, opponents different, but I really did think of that Ohio State play back in 2018. And I think in Penn State lexicon, maybe 4th and 2 is going to come on with a little bit of a deeper meaning after that one. But yeah, I mean, I think that this offense and the identity of it, it's very, very hard to pin down. You did hit on the big play to Khalil Dinkins for the 40-yard touchdown. And that felt like that it really got you back into the game. On top of that, you got a blocked punt, so you got gifted 7 points right there by UCLA. But I think to come into a game like this and get 28 points from your offense, it's tough. it's been very unimpressive moving forward. And, I think that you see Penn State returning to the same well over and over again. And it makes you wonder about, okay, like what can they do to get back in there to, change something. But I think it does come back down to, put the ball in your best player's hands. Like get the ball to Katron Allen. I think at that point in the game, I would have felt good with the ball in Drew Aller's hands, either throwing or keeping the ball. Devontae Ross, who I think that we all thought was, looking like one of those guys after last week, no catches, no official targets. He was targeted once on a play that ended up being a DPI for a 15-yard gain.
Daniel, this is his first catchless game since October 2023, now that you bring it up.
Yeah, so it just, it seemed like you've got different guys that you can put the ball in their hands. And, I think that Trevor Pena could be considered one of those guys, but I don't pretend to know a ton about scheme and things like that. But just from where I'm watching, when you've got only 2 yards to go, time is so precious. And you need to be able to go because everything is so condensed. Everything's going to happen so quickly. And to build in, that half second or 3/4 second or even full second that comes with making that read, that just gives you so much more opportunity, for things to go wrong. I mean, I think if they line up under center or even a run out of shotgun or the pistol and you give it to Katron Allen or even Nick Singleton and it's just run up the middle, like our beefy guys up front against the beef in the trenches on the other side, and you don't get it, I think that you understand that. That's like a, man versus man type of play. But you introduced so many more variables than you really needed to. And I think that it just came back to bite you.
What Penn State has shown me on offense through 5 games, Daniel, is that they only trust 5 combined wide receivers and running backs. Trevor Pena, Devontae Ross, Kyron Hudson, Nick Singleton, Katron Allen. Apparently, they don't value Katron Allen enough to actually use him the way I think he needs to be utilized. 8 carries today. Against the worst rushing team in Power 4 conference football. Felt like a good blend for me going into this game, but they have not established anybody beyond that. Liam Clifford has fallen by the wayside offensively. He scored a touchdown today on a block punt, big time play there that helped get them involved. And Dennis Sutton blocked it, but they did not establish a guy like Tysier Denmark or Kobe Howard, who had some of the buzz earlier in the year. They got 4 combined snaps against FIU and Villanova. There was nothing coming out of the non-conference play at running back or receiver where it's like, okay, you've got somebody on the rise here behind who we already knew was going to be in play. And so you're just sticking with the 5. And then you've got a few tight ends and Rappleyea and Dinkins and Reynolds that you like. But just talking about the running back receiver position, and these guys have all been involved in the run game, it seems. They don't have a lot of trust beyond that. And that's a problem. And I think that goes to what James Franklin said, and we can bring that up right now. Mark Wogenrich, one of our colleagues who's covered this team a long time, asked the final question of the postgame press conference. And he basically brought up something James told us on multiple occasions going into preseason camp, and that is that he felt this was the best, most talented personnel under Penn State's roof during his watch year, 12 seasons. That includes the staff. That includes the roster. He was asked, hey, do you still feel that way? And I'm going to look up the direct quote here because it's a pretty quick answer from James Franklin, and I want to make sure I get it right. He said, quote, obviously that question at this moment, I mean, how am I supposed to answer that when we lose the last 2 games? That's all that matters. We didn't win the last 2 games. But yeah, obviously I felt that way, or I wouldn't have said it. But after 2 losses, it's hard for me to answer that question and say that's the case. Daniel, you were just a few feet away from him when he gave that answer. Can you talk us through what that meant to you and maybe any other nuggets we need to glean coming out of that press conference that you kind of picked up on?
Yeah, I think to me that what it showed me is that there is the understanding, from Penn State, from James Franklin. I can see the equipment truck rolling out right now. That's probably not going to be the most fun drive back to Central Pennsylvania right now. But I think that for James Franklin, I think in these press conference situations, he can talk about a lot of things. I'm not going to say that he obfuscates things or is maybe dishonest like some people might. I think that when he talks, it's pretty clear what he's saying, even if he doesn't necessarily say it explicitly. I do think that mentioning travel earlier in the presser was not something that anyone wants to hear. That's a little bit of a read the room type of thing. Only thing that would have been worse is if he mentioned a runway. And so,
Daniel, I mean, it's easy to say, hey, remember when the Oregon Ducks flew in on Friday and stayed in Altoona, drove out to Altoona, and then came back, and they seemed okay, right?
Yeah, but I do think that answer from James Franklin, I think that it goes back to the cliche that's like, you are what your record is, and this Penn State team is 3-2 with 3 wins over programs that are not that great and wins that did not come as easily as they should have. And they are 0-2 in Big Ten play against, one team that, okay, like that's a tough one. Like, Oregon, like maybe win that. That's maybe like a 50-50 shot game. But then the other loss is against UCLA, which we've, ad nauseum set the scene of what this program is, where it's at, what the expectations are. And then you drop 42 points. You allow 42 points to that team. And I think that it's like, you are what your record is, like you are what you're doing on the field. I think that at this point, like you can't really point to, this guy's back and he was an All-American last year. This guy's back and he was All Big Ten. This guy was a 5-star recruit. He's in his second year now. You can't really point to potential anymore if you're Penn State. It's like, this is what it is, and this is how it's going to be. And right now, that's not good. Like, that's not good enough. It's not a national championship caliber team. It's not a Big Ten championship caliber team. I think they're still a college football playoff caliber team, just at the nature of the 12-team playoff. And I think that maybe, yeah. I mean, I think this may be like a top 15 to 20 team right now, maybe top 20 to 25 type team right now, the way that they're playing. Really curious to see where they are in the national polls tomorrow afternoon. But I think James Franklin knows that that's how they're playing, and that's just what they are right now. And you've got 2 games to change a couple minds and a bye week. And then I think that when you get to Ohio State, that's when it turns into, I think, a big fork in the road for, not necessarily the season. I think the season, that game will decide the season. Like, there's no fork there. But I think it could be a fork in the road for the program in terms of, where are you going? Where are you taking this? What do you want to be? What are these coaches bringing? Just an assortment of things. It's not a good spot if you're Penn State right now.
This is not the conversation that we thought we'd be having to start October. There's just no way around that. And ultimately, James Franklin was asked in postgame, why was his team not ready to play in this game? And when you fall down 27-7 against a team that hadn't led anyone through 4 games, you weren't ready. His answer was, quote, obviously we did not handle last week's loss well. We also lost some players in that game during the week. And then everything else, the travel, everything else did not come out with the right energy to start the game. And before you know it, they get a touchdown drive, an onside kick, and now you're fighting. They gain confidence, and we're fighting for the next 3 quarters. That's my responsibility, and I didn't get it done. And I think when he's taking responsibility for these losses in back-to-back weeks, and again, we're venturing into territory where the bar set this year was 1994. There was no question about it. It was 1994, undefeated season, get it done. This is feeling more like 2021 to me so far, as things stand right now. That is a huge gap. That is a major discrepancy in expectation versus reality. And what do you make of it, Daniel? What James Franklin is personally now going to encounter, not just in Beaver Stadium next Saturday, but the power brokers in the Penn State football community, the people who ultimately determine where the cash flow comes from for this program, to pay the players, to pay the staff, to make sure James Franklin gets all the yeses to his answers. Where is that conversation heading right now? Because I'd imagine you're also dealing with people who had no idea they'd be in this spot on the first Saturday of October. Now they are, and you just wonder what happens here in year 12 moving forward for Franklin.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be, I think, an interesting couple of days, interesting couple of weeks. I do think that we'll see if it gets to a point where you let cooler heads prevail. You maybe let people relax a little bit. Unfortunately, you don't really have that luxury because you got to play again, and you're going to play another bad team. And if you don't perform the way that people think you should against that bad team, it's going to make that noise even louder. I think that this is a week that, and we talked about it earlier, just in the way that it's like Franklin made it sound like that they let some of that outside noise get to them, that they didn't handle it the best way. I think that's kind of alarming at this point, especially when you consider that it's going to be even worse. Like anything everyone heard last week is going to be ramped up, doubled, just put in just an even worse spot. So, I mean, like, yeah, I think that, you're starting to get to that point where, like, James Franklin in year 12, what is this? Where is it going? This is the type of loss that makes you ask those types of questions. And like I said, after Ohio State, like, that's when you get to the fork in the road of different things. And I think that it's just really embarrassing for Penn State right now to have this type of performance when you consider the roster, consider the coordinators, their reputations, what you're paying them. It is just a very, very rough spot for Penn State. And we're going to, we learned a lot about Penn State this week, and we're going to learn even more as we move forward.
And it's a well-compensated roster now. That's also the new reality here. And these players got to understand that they are not walking home to like a get right moment, like oh, we're home, everyone's going to be there for us. Like, they will hear their coach booed when he is introduced on the big screen, not by every single person in that stadium, but they will hear those boos. And if they start off bad, the crowd will jump on them, and there will be Fire Franklin chants again. And they need to understand that's now the road ahead. And they need to be mentally tough enough and look internally and be like, we got to survive this together, and we got to prove it to ourselves. And if they're not up to that task, then they just simply weren't the team that they told us they were, that we thought they were. And that's just the case. And that's the cold reality of it. And they could end up picking up a kind of loss total that no one expected. Indiana, Nebraska, Iowa on the schedule down the road. I mean, heck, even Rutgers doesn't look like a layup anymore when you do this at a UCLA. And so, Daniel, we'll have a lot to talk about when we huddle up again on Monday, or whenever we do early in the week. We'll bring in Mark Brennan. I know Mark's going to have a lot to say about this performance and where Penn State stands right now. He's hard at work right now with post-game coverage, and I know you are too. I'll let you get back to it. Thanks for finding a spot. I know we didn't get everything probably that everyone wanted to hear, but I hope that you can appreciate some of the raw conversation that we're having right now, coming off a team that we get paid to cover literally 24/7. This is our livelihood too. It's not necessarily the conversations we want to be having, but we're objective as hell here, I think, and we're going to weather the storm. And there's a lot of that storm right now on the message boards. We will do our diligence to bring you the best reporting we can. Stay with us. It's going to be an interesting ride, so buckle up. But Daniel, always appreciate on these post-game podcasts, and this has been certainly one of the more unique conversations that you and I have had together.
Yeah, and I will say that Mark and some of the other veterans on the beat were running the numbers a little bit. They think this is the smallest traveling beat party that Penn State has had for a game since like 1983. I think Mark and I were both here. Other people couldn't make it for various circumstances, but we really felt it was important to be here, even though on paper this wasn't really lining up as a big type of game. So we appreciate everyone who reads, appreciate the overlords at 24/7 to allow us to come and bring you this coverage. And we're gonna have a lot these next couple of days. I'm gonna do my best to set the scene for you. Gonna have some stuff about what Penn State is facing this week. We talk about the noise. That was a big topic of conversation post game. And I'm gonna have a 5.5 hour flight tomorrow. Gonna have a lot to think about, a lot to unpack with this team. So I appreciate everyone who watches, reads. The Rose Bowl is beautiful, even though it's not a Rose Bowl and it's just a UCLA game. Amazing place to watch a game, and definitely adds to the surreality of it.
Well, ready or not, we got a lot to discuss over at Lions 24/7 for the next several days. We're back in with a press conference with James Franklin not too long from now, Monday at noon. So there's going to be plenty to ask him then. In between now and then, a lot of post-game coverage coming your way from Mark and Daniel. Those guys did a great job sending me some stuff from out in Pasadena, so I'm rolling with some post-game coverage. On behalf of Daniel, on behalf of Mark out there, I am Tyler Donahue. Thanks as always for listening or watching to the Lions 24/7 podcast.